首先，大家見到台中間着住我哋制服嘅係有警察公共關係科總警司謝振中。另外，這上右手邊嘅係有組織罪案及三合會調查科高級警司李桂華。大家台嘅右手邊係有我哋嘅警察公共關係科高級警司黃偉祥，同埋左手邊嘅司
Senior Superintendent Media Liaison and Communication of PPLB, and then left-hand side, Madam Chick Xia Yu, Superintendent of Support Branch. Thank you. In the past 2 months, many rallies and demonstrations were held peacefully. However, some radical demonstrators did a lot of unlawful and violent acts. As I said, the police will have zero tolerance for any unlawful behavior, and we will enforce the law strictly. I'd like to brief you on follow-up actions that has been taken on violence acts in the past 2 months. We have not stopped any investigation. Whenever there is sufficient evidence, we will immediately arrest persons concerned. On Monday, already announced some of the figures of arrest in the 2 rallies in Kunta and Chunwan, and then we have also arrested 26 since last weekend, involving 24 male and 2 females aged between 18 and 48 years. For these 26 persons, they were involved in an unlawful assembly on the 9th of June, an unlawful assembly on the 12th of June, rampant damage of the electrical building on 1st of July, attacks at Yunlong Station on the 21st of July, illegal assembly in Tsimsha on the 11th of August, and attack of mainland reporter and paralysis of the airport on the 13th of August, and also unlawful comments made online. And they were arrested for the following offences: unlawful assembly, criminal damage, entry or stay in the chamber of the electrical, and possession of offensive weapon, access to computer with dishonest intent, wounding, and possession of ammunition without a license, and fraud. These are serious crimes, and they can be subject to imprisonment from 1 to 14 years. This goes to show that the government takes these very seriously. Even though no immediate arrest was made, that doesn't mean that we've turned a blind eye to such behavior, and we will certainly take these people to task. In the past 2 months, we have arrested close to 900 people. According to facts of the case and also exhibits seized, we see a very worrying sign. The radical protesters have been escalating the violence and using deadly weapons, and the crime has spread to places in Hong Kong, Kowloon, and NT. It's quite obvious that these radical protesters are getting more violent, and the intensity and extent and also extensity has also spread. Starting from June, they removed railings to make barricades to block roads. They hurled hard objects at the police. They used umbrellas to attack our colleagues, and they also besieged the Revenue Tower and the police headquarters. They made graffiti on the external walls affecting government services. Back then, those behavior concentrated on Hong Kong Island and were relatively less violent. And then in July, they became more rampant, and places affected spread to districts in Kowloon and NT, and places affected included Tuen Mun, Mong Kok, Shengshui, Shantin, and Yunlong. Radical protesters stormed into LC building, affecting, damaging facilities inside, and they hijacked the public activities on Saturdays and Sundays, and they are becoming more violent. They smeared the walls of police stations. They used bricks to smash windows of police stations and discipline services quarters. They attack our officers. They surrounded police vehicles. They use strong slingshots to attack our lines. They used very strong laser beams to attack eyes of our officers to use film discs and even large road signs to attack police officers. As at end of July, we've seen sporadic arson cases. These violent acts have caused discontent on the part of members of the public and has directly or indirectly caused disputes and fights. In June, there was no sign of calming down, and they have certainly reached the bottom line of violence acceptable to the community. They are affecting places like Zhangguanou, 天水圍、葵涌皇太線、屯門、深水埗、紅磡 and 荃灣. They even affected the operation of MTR stations at the airport. A number of flights were cancelled, and the operation of our international airport was brought to a standstill. They do not just affect services provided by the government to the community. They also affected visitors from all over the world, and they have damaged our image as a city of hospitality. As for weapons, they have escalated to use deadly weapons. They're becoming more brutal, and on a large scale, they use petrol bombs, air guns, and sharpened bamboo poles to attack police officers proactively. Anyone on the street, so long as he holds different political views as the radical protesters, they will be surrounded and beaten up and even tied up. They will not be allowed to leave, and these protesters wanted to take justice into their own hands. Hong Kong was once called one of the safest cities in the world, but now people have started to query. In fact, many countries have, because of the chaos in Hong Kong, reminded the nationals to keep track of the situation in Hong Kong and to be careful of their personal safety. 31 countries already issued different levels of travel advisory against Hong Kong. Whenever places frequented by these radical protesters, the shops will be closed and everything will be quiet, and members of the public dare not go out, fearing that they will be affected by violent behavior. At this stage, every week we have to think whether it is safe to go out and whether there will be a road blockage and whether there will be arson and communal damage in a particular district. If the situation continues to worsen, then everyone in Hong Kong will be strongly affected.
I would now hand over to Mr. Kong to share with us some operation figures. Yesterday, that is the 27th of August, in our operation in Shan Shui Po, we arrested 2 men on site, aged 37 and 46 respectively, for taking part in an unlawful assembly. The cases are being investigated by the West Kowloon Regional Crime Unit, and the 46-year-old man is still being detained. And at around 1 a.m. today, when the police conducted raids in Shan Shui Po, police officers found that 3 underage boys were loitering on the street. And having intercepted these boys, their age was between 13 and 15, but they could not produce any identification document, and for the sake of safety, they were taken to a police station. Subsequently, their families produced the IDs of these boys, and having verified the identity of these 3 boys, they were brought home by their families. They were not arrested by the police. As for the court cases, 2 persons who took part in the public events in Kwun Tong and Kowloon Bay were accused of illegal blockage of road and hurling hard objects at police officers, and they were charged with rioting, and another 23-year-old man was charged for assaulting a police officer, and the first court appearance was at the Kwun Tong Magistrates Court this afternoon. And at the march in Tsuen Wan on the 25th, the police asked one 22-year-old woman to produce her Hong Kong identity card, but it was rejected despite multiple warnings, and such that woman was arrested, and she was charged for obstructing police officers from discharging their duties. And the first court appearance was on the same day at the West Kowloon Magistrates Court, but since that woman claimed to be feeling unwell and had to be hospitalized, the first court appearance was moved to this afternoon. And we are aware that a video was being circulated online, and the video showed that a petrol bomb was hurled towards the protesters from the police cordon line. We checked different video footages and asked the police officers on site, and we found that the relevant videos were butchered. The incident happened the past Sunday at about 6 p.m. At that time, the police and violent protesters came to a confrontation between Yonge Road and Taiho Road in Tsuen Wan, and the protesters hurled petrol bombs at the police. The original video clearly showed that the petrol bomb in question, that is the third bomb hurled by the protesters, was hurled towards the police cordon line, but subsequently the video was butchered to show the police hurling the petrol bomb at the protesters. So let's take a look at the footage. First of all, according to online rumors, the police were alleged to be using petrol bombs. The petrol bomb circled in red was the one allegedly hurled by the police. So let's look at another slow motion replay. And on another footage, you can see that the petrol bomb was hurled towards the police by protesters. So let's look at a slow motion replay. Another video footage circulated online showed another angle. On the red circle in the bottom right, you could see that protesters hurled a burning object towards the police. In order to facilitate a clearer understanding, we would replay this video. First, the video circulated online alleging the police of using petrol bombs. And then let's look at a news footage which showed how the petrol bomb was hurled towards the police by the protesters. Finally, a video showing another angle. Please pay attention to the bottom right, the part circled in red. The protesters hurled a petrol bomb towards the police. So from these videos, you can see that the allegation that the police used petrol bombs towards the protesters were untrue. For people who maliciously spread such videos, who wanted to harbor the malicious acts of the protesters, I can say that they would not succeed. We are also aware that a news article was circulated online. An online media outlet said the police used petrol bombs on the protesters. The relevant outlet already made a clarification, and that is the police never used petrol bombs. They admitted their mistake and they apologized to the police force. We are also aware that a photo was circulated online yesterday which showed that a group of people with reflective vests with the words police drill holding round police shields appeared in Cheungchao. Some people wondered whether these people were police officers. We would like to clarify that these people in reflective vests were police officers in training, and they were performing a drill and training in Cheungchao. I would like to hand over to Madam Chick to explain the procedures for meeting duty officers by detainees and an overview of the San Opening detention facilities. Madam Chick. We would like to talk about the detention facilities and safeguard of rights of detainees. Like we said yesterday, in terms of the police's policy, procedures and guidelines in establishing the guidelines on detainees detained and kept in custody, we would try to strike a balance between the dignity, privacy, and rights of detainees. We have 42 reporting rooms in police stations. We are also managing 39 detention cells located in police stations, boundary crossing points, and borders. They were established in different years, beginning from the Peak Police Station, which was commissioned in the 1880s, to the Yamate Police Station, which opened in 2016. And as such, the designs and sizes of different police stations, detention cells, and temporary holding areas were different, and the numbers also differ. In order to aid in understanding of our detention facilities, especially the older facilities, I'd like to share some photos. This is an older detention cell, and you can see that in the cell there is a bed that allows detainees to lie flat. Every detainee can obtain a blanket from our duty officer, and if they wish to take a shower, they would be provided with a personal sanitary or hygiene kit, including toothbrush, toothpaste, and soap. And also in the detention cell, there would be a bathroom, and detainees can use the toilet without having to obtain permission from the duty officer. And a box of tissues would be provided to each detainee in the cell as well. As for the safeguard of detainees' rights, on the corridor outside each cell, a notice to arrested persons would be displayed clearly. So I'd like to zoom in to the notice. This would be displayed right outside the detention cell. The Chinese and English versions would be posted outside the cell. The
detainee to confirm his rights and during detention, and if need be, that can be request made to the duty officer. Now, this is our interview room. It can be used for taking statement, for meeting with a lawyer or any visitor. Recently, there are a lot of discussions about the Sun Luk Ling Holding Center. Well, it is under the Ta Kwu Ling Division, and it is standing detention facility of the force. It was established in 1979. The facilities, the security, and for taking care of the privacy of detainees are in line with the requirements of our policy. And this is the photo of the Sun Luk Ling Detention Center. As regards rights of detainees, they are entitled to a number of rights, and our officers will explain to them very clearly rights they are entitled to. They are entitled to have legal support, including calling a lawyer, or in writing, or to meet a lawyer face-to-face. And during an interview with the police, that can be done in the presence of a lawyer. If the detainee hasn't got his own lawyer, he can ask for a list of lawyers promulgated by the Law Society so that he can choose a suitable one. And if a third party asks to meet with the detainee claiming that he's been instructed by another person, that the detainee can choose whether he wants to meet with that lawyer or not. He can also seek legal support, and during detention, the detainee is also entitled to medical treatment. When the duty officer meets a detainee for the first time, he will confirm whether it is reasonable for him to be arrested, and there will also be a short questioning of the detainee to see whether there are any observable wounds or injuries. And if the person needs medical treatment because of illness or injury, the duty officer will arrange for him to be sent to the nearest public hospital or clinic for treatment. And during detention, the detainee can only take medication recognized by a government doctor, and also according to the dosage and frequency prescribed by the doctor. All detainees should be made aware of their rights, and so they will be given a copy of the notice, and a copy will be given to him. The content is what I've just shown you, the very big notice, and it will be posted. In fact, it is posted just outside the detention room for detainees to see. Detainees of different sexes will not be detained in the same room, and minors will not be detained together with adults in the same room. All female detainees have to be accompanied by a female police officers before they will be received, processed, detained, and also to carry out the custodial search. And I want to reiterate that custodial search would only be conducted, witnessed, and supervised by officers of the same sex as the detainee. There will be no officers of the opposite sex present. I would like to stress that we respect the dignity, privacy, and rights of persons under police custody. We have the relevant policies, and all officers have been given sufficient training, and we will also take reference from management, a model of our overseas counterparts, in order to perfect our policies and holding facilities. Now, recently there are accusations that during our operations we have been sexually harassing different detainees, including unnecessary bonding contact of arrested persons of different sex. We have made clarifications a number of times. However, there are media reports that a number of female arrested persons have been subject to sexual harassment by police officers. This is a very serious accusation. The reason why we clarify here is not to refute the claims of the arrested persons. However, if APs feel aggrieved, they can lodge a complaint to CAPO so that we can carry out a fair and comprehensive investigation. Now, it's been more than 2 years since the protests against the extradition bill. Some protesters claim at the beginning that their bottom line is not to hurt anybody, but you may want to judge whether that is still their bottom line. They've been using deadly weapons to attack police officers proactively, and not just police officers, even civilians, tourists, and taxi drivers who happen to drive by, and drivers of light goods vehicles and also private vehicles have been attacked by radical protesters. If there is no bottom line, and if this is to go on, what will happen to our community? Everyone in Hong Kong will have to pay a price, and even innocent civilians may be beaten up, their commercial or the community facilities may be damaged, and faced with such violent protest activities, can we still go out with ease of mind? While dealing with this, I urge all members of the public to cut ties with such violent acts.
We have seen radical acts springing up and spreading out across various different districts in Hong Kong. The escalation and extension of violence have caused widespread fear among the public. As we have pledged to all Hong Kong citizens, the Hong Kong police take every case very seriously and have zero tolerance for all unlawful acts. We spend every effort to bring all offenders to justice. Last Monday, we announced new arrests made on the spot in the violent incident in Tsuen Wan and Kwun Tong. As for previous crimes, indeed, over the past few days, we arrested 26 people, consisting 24 males and 2 females, for the offences on various occasions. To name a few, the unlawful assembly outside Lechko on 9th of June, mass destruction of the Lechko on 1st of July, Yuen Long incident on 21st of July, unlawful assembly in Tsim Sha Tsui on 11th of August, etc. Weeks after weeks, month after month, these radical protesters are tearing our society apart and tearing down our core values, including the rule of law. At first, protesters took to the street to express their will in a general peaceful manner. The police respect their right to assembly and freedom of speech. But later, they set barricades on major roads with dismantled railings from both sides and long poles. Some intentionally block labor crossing and paralyze key transport facilities. In one instance, a large group of protesters randomly tied up innocent visitors and beat him, shaming him publicly. Now we saw rioters throwing petrol bombs around on main roads, hitting civilians and reporters. They even start fires, shot metal balls with slingshots, and threw sharp poles and metal sticks at police officers. Reckless and ruthless best describe their actions. Here in Hong Kong, we always pride ourselves on our safety and rule of law. But now, 31 countries have issued travel advisories. Visitors are having second thought about coming to Hong Kong. It is high time to stop all acts of violence and restore Hong Kong's public safety and order. Now I'll move on to the arrest figures. Yesterday, we arrested 2 people, one aged 37 and the other 46, for unlawful assembly on the spot in Sham Shui Po. Now I'll make some clarification about misinformation online. Firstly, there was a video circulating online that seems to show some petrol bombs were thrown from police cordons. But we can confirm that the video is fabricated. Petrol bombs never came from outside. They were thrown recklessly by rioters. Secondly, there was a news headline issued by an international media outlet saying that police used petrol bombs against Hong Kong protesters. The media company confirmed with us that they indeed make a mistake in the headline. They quickly correct the headline, and we just received a letter of apology from them before this press conference. We understand the public concern about how we handle detainees. Our superintendent from the support wing, Ms. Kitty Chick, just gave an overview of our relevant policy in Cantonese. To recap very briefly in English, we have very strict guidelines to take care of the rights and well-being of arrested person. They have a number of rights, including, first, the right to seek legal assistance, to communicate privately with a lawyer. Secondly, the right to be supplied with adequate food, refreshment, and drinking waters. And thirdly, the right to receive medical attention, etc. Detainees can at any time approach duty officer or any police officer to raise any concern. All complaints against police can be channeled through an existing mechanism. In conclusion, an ongoing protest has spanned over 2 months in Hong Kong. Initially, the protesters claimed they would not hurt others. But as you see, they have been crossing the line and risking the lives of many innocent citizens, as well as our police officers. Their reckless act take a heavy toll on the whole society. Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask, is this the Hong Kong we would like to see. Please, we need to stop this right now. Please join us to restore public safety and get our society back on track. Thank you.
好，嚟緊落嚟會係我哋嘅問答時間嘅。商台啊。
你好，商業電台，想請教知道警方拘捕咗幾個人啦，就係涉嫌7·1衝擊立法會，咁其中一個應該就係城大學生會編委會嘅成員啦。咁據佢哋編委會講呢，當時嗰個同學係有着住啲反軍背心啦，同埋佩戴記者證嘅。咁想確認下係咪佢係以涉嫌串謀刑毀被捕呢？即係如果係，其實警方初步調查佢當時係做緊啲乜嘢？Were
they arrested for vandalism, and did they have any press or student ID? I'd like to follow up on the situation at Sun Uk Ling. Allegedly, 6 detainees suffered bone fractures, and reports yesterday quoted anonymous nurses in North Hospital saying that some were in serious condition. So if facing such situation, would the police send detainees to hospitals without authorization? And what could cause the bone fractures, or what would be the level of resistance from the detainees that could result in such a situation? As for the arrest, I would defer to Mr. Lee, and then for the second question, Mr. Kong. Mr. Lee, please. With regards to the serious vandalism at Letchco on the 1st of July, the trial division is investigating the matter, and on that day we arrested 4 men aged 19 to 29. One was the person you just highlighted, and they were arrested for 2 offences. First, the crime of entering and remaining in precincts of the chamber under the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance, as well as criminal damage under the Crimes Ordinance. You asked whether they were acting in the roles of reporters or media. We would say that according to the evidence we collected, they were carrying out damaging acts at that time. I think these had nothing to do with any reporting or media work. Mr. Kong, please, for the second question. For Sun Uk Ling, I read the relevant reports, and according to our records, based on age and the extent of injuries, we are yet to determine which detainee was in question. And given the current circumstances, we have difficulty obtaining medical records. That's why we cannot grasp or understand the injuries of the protesters. And for the person alleged to be a nurse who was masked, if he or she could provide any information which could assist with our investigation, I hope the nurse could provide details, because we want to get to the root of the facts as well. Recently, in a number of raids, we face strong resistance from the persons to be arrested. Some people might feel that once the persons are subdued or are pressed to the ground, they would be subdued, but this is not always the case. For the more violent rioters, we could not subdue them until they are on handcuffs, and many of them refuse to be handcuffed. They grasp their fists very firmly, and as such, our officers had to put on handcuffs for them, and inevitably there could be injuries. I hope no one wants to be arrested, but for those who are arrested, please be cooperative because we are reluctant to use force. From the perspective of the police, we are obliged to ensure the safety and well-being of persons arrested, and that is the purpose of using handcuffs. Sing Tao, please. Mr. Lee said the City U student conducted acts that were not relevant to his reporting work. So what kind of vandalizing acts did he or she commit? All along, some protesters and public want to complain about the acts of frontline officers, but they refuse to show their warrants or numbers. So how could the public lodge complaints? And does the police management allow frontline officers to not produce their police IDs? And there are rumors online that there would be events in multiple areas tomorrow. So would the police take action to protect from the public from being beaten up? The media saw that the police use police dogs at certain sites, but is there any protection measure for the police dogs? And did any police dogs get injured, or and would the use of tear gas be against animal cruelty? And would the police promise not to bring police dogs if tear gas is to be deployed on site? I would defer to Mr. Lee and Mr. Kong, and I would take the final question. For the first question, it had to do with a very specific case, and it might be unfair to the person involved, but I'd like to offer some pointers. You should have watched the footage on the 1st of July. What happened that day? Graffiti was being painted, there was vandalism. So if charges are pressed, the offense would likely be criminal damage. As for the specific offenses of specific people, I could not divulge the details. As for the police IDs and warrants of police officers, as I have said many times, there are internal guidelines for uniformed officers. Their uniforms must carry police ID or other forms of identification, and as to whether they have to produce the warrants, it would depend on whether the circumstances allow it or whether it is reasonable. I cited a number of examples in the past. If our officers were dispersing the crowds or making arrests, you cannot ask the officers to pause and produce their ID. So such circumstances did not allow for that. And if there were mass dispersing efforts, if a member of the public blocks the path of police officers asking for a warrant to be produced, that would be unreasonable. The premise is that without jeopardizing the action or operation of the police, warrants would be produced.
As for plainclothes officers, well, again, there are two conditions. First, whether the officer is in contact with the public, and second, whether he is exercising his police powers. For instance, when plainclothes officers carry out license check at bars and pubs, of course, they are in contact with the public, and therefore they must display their warrants. And the force management will for sure ask all colleagues to follow our guidelines and also orders. Speakers of mic. And very often, the badges or the number is covered with a white piece of paper. Oh, thank you very much for your supplementary question. Now, for police vests, there is a transparent pocket. And for PTU officers, they should have an ID number on their shoulder pad. When I received PTU training, that space was not meant for placing an ID number. When I was trained, there was a card placed there to display the company I belong to facilitate internal communication. For instance, when I look at Mr. Zhe, I may not be able to see his shoulder, and when we're wearing helmets, then PTU members may not be able to recognize our officers. So the sign facilitates recognition among officers. It's not a place for placing our warrant cards. I just want to clarify this. All right, I don't want to be in the way of other reporters. I will take this last question. As I said, PTU officers are uniformed officers, and they're supposed to carry an ID number with them. And is it necessary to have a warrant card with them? I think the important thing is for us to identify who the officer is, and what you require may be superfluous. Regarding intelligence from the internet, well, we have been monitoring the situation in dealing with a large public event. It will depend on the location, and we will carry out a risk assessment, and that will be the basis for deployment of manpower to ensure that in large public activity we can use our resources more flexibly and effectively. It's not convenient for me to divulge details of our operation, but if you receive any messages or intelligence that there may be brutal attack on other persons, the police do not condone that, and we appeal to everyone in the public to express their views in a peaceful and rational manner. We do not condone or tolerate any violence. And police dogs, in training and deploying police dogs, we have very careful consideration with very strict guidelines and training to ensure that our police dogs can be effective. And we have regular body checks for our dogs done by vets. I said today we have not seen any problem with the health of our police dogs, so we do not have any figures you saw just now. My questions have been answered. Well, if the police officer refuses to produce his warrant card, how can we lodge a complaint against him? Coupled in receiving complaints, of course, if photos and ID numbers and even names of officers are accompanied, and it will be easy for us to identify them. But if it is not available, well, assuming that the complaint is there is no ID card display, then you won't know who he is. But depending on the location, the operation relevant to the case, we will try to find out who was involved. That's our usual practice. CNN.
It's Sandy from CNN. I just wondered if there's any reaction to the Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, leaving the door open to invoking emergency powers. She mentioned that yesterday. It's not been confirmed, but does the police feel like she's losing faith in the work that you're doing? And my supplementary question is about whether there's still any kind of mainland police that are coming to work with the police in Hong Kong, or whether there's any training taking place in the mainland as well. Thank you.
Okay, for the emergency regulation ordinance mentioned by a few media reports, We are aware of such news yesterday and today, and basically we are a law enforcement agency, and we are not in a position to comment on this area. And that's all what I can talk about. And for the PLA you mentioned, according to the basic law as well as the national law, the authority to turn out a PLA rests with the Hong Kong government as well as the Chinese central government. Therefore, the police are also not in a position to comment on the necessity to turn out PLA. And I would like to reiterate that police is capable and determined to restore public safety and order in this difficult time in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you.
AM 730。
AM 730. Well, we have so many questions because we've seen that on different occasions there are double standards on the part of the police in enforcement. I'd like to know whether you have further training after passing out from police college, because in some cases the police seem to be very proactive. However, in the incident involving Yuen Long attack, the police hasn't been so proactive. Is it that at different places you have different locations? And every time when we have questions, Mr. Z or other officers will say that we have every trust in our frontline officers and nothing can be found in your records. Is there anything you can cross-check, and are there measures to ascertain that claims or remarks by your police officers are true? Perhaps they may be trying to hide facts from you. So how can members of the public trust your records? And you talked about trusting the judgment of frontline officers. How can you convince us? And as for arrangement for medical treatment, Mr. Lee said yesterday that if an arrested person so requests, since you are layman, you would try to make arrangements as far as possible. You talked about triage. I'd like to know what is your triage arrangement? Will you call an ambulance first, and then you arrange for police officers to accompany the arrested person to the hospital? What are the procedures? Can you please take the third question involving Sun Oak Ling Holding Center first? If an arrested person, for whatever reason, due to injury or whatnot, asks for medical treatment, or if a duty officer is of the view that the AP's condition require a doctor. Now, I talked about triage yesterday. If at the same time many arrested persons want to see a doctor or have to be sent to the hospital, when the first ambulance arrives, we will determine who should go first. And this is the triage I'm talking about. So who should go first? Of course, we have to consider the subjective feeling of the AP, how ill he feels or how serious his injury is, and we'll also observe whether he has got very serious wounds. If it look minor, or if the AP complains of severe diarrhea and abdominal pain, we will see whether he has any pallor, so on and so forth. So in the process, we hope to send people with the greatest need to the hospital first. And in our holding facilities, whether it be Sun Oak Ling or other police stations, if the signs or the injuries or wounds look rather superficial or minor, we have first aid material will help them to stop the bleeding or simple bandaging first.
As an enforcement agency, many of our staff have received formal first aid training, and as such, we can take care of the needy arrested persons. As for inconsistency in law enforcement or inconsistent standards, I do not agree with your view at all. You said that starting from early June and in the recent episodes of violence,
嘅違法行為咧，其實咧我哋嗰個執法咧嗰個尺度其實係完全一致。
The police exercise the same yardstick on violence or offences. Like I said previously,
不能亦都不應該我哋直接做一個比較。
different cases cannot be compared directly. And in terms of decisions made when we conducted operations, such decisions were made based on different factors. For example, the number of people who committed crimes, the offences committed at that time, the number of police officers available at that time, and whether taking action would worsen the overall situation, etc. And as such, our police officers must consider many different factors. And in terms of investigation, even if we cannot make immediate arrests against offenders, we would conduct thorough investigations, and after we collect sufficient evidence, we would make arrests on people who on the offenders. That's why I do not agree with your view that the standard of enforcement is inconsistent. As to how we can cross-check the acts conducted or committed by our police officers, all police officers must keep records, and such records can take the form of notebooks, and the daily work of officers would be monitored by their supervisors, and if there is any doubts, Hong Kong has an independent complaints mechanism, that is the Independent Police Complaints Council Ordinance. This is an independent body which oversees complaints received by our complaints against police officers or CAPO, and there are checks and balances in place. And that is, there would be observers who can monitor the cases or complaints. In terms of internal and external oversight on complaints, on the whole, I think we are doing a good job in terms of cross-checking. The speaker is not coming through the microphone. In terms of protecting the public, for example, on the 21st of July, you talked about arrests. So at Yipei Square in Tsuen Wan, would you investigate the matter? On the 21st of July, many citizens were attacked, but we all saw what happened with the police officers. You said, well, those officers were armed. So that has to do with inconsistent enforcement standards. Again, I would not draw comparisons between two separate incidents because that's unfair. As for Yipei Square in Tsuen Wan, we arrived at the scene to deal with reported crimes before the police vehicles arrived. Well, even before they arrived at the scene, they were attacked by violent protesters, and one of our police officers were injured by a sharp metal pole by protesters. And the officers were under serious attack, and they were even threatened, and that is why they drew a gun and fired a shot skywards at that time, and that was for self-defense. I think it's not appropriate to compare that incident with other incidents. Xinhua Agency. I have three questions. One about figures. The police announced the figures from January to June 2019, and Hong Kong's crime rates were lowest since 1977. So for July and August, as of now, what are the overall crime figures? Was there any increase in the crime rates? The second question. And with the constant escalation at marches and protests, to what extent was the police's handling of crimes such as robbery, kidnaps, etc. And Hong Kong has always been one of the cities with the lowest crime rates in the world. And would Hong Kong's crime situation worsen as a whole? Thank you. With regards to the overall crime situation in Hong Kong, I do not have with me a lot of figures, but as of well, the figures from July and August are yet to be updated or available. I can say that in the first half of 2019, Hong Kong's overall crime figures were dropping. The decline was 4.6 or 4.7 figure, so 4.7%. I cannot provide a very concrete figure today, but like we said earlier, since June, we have been dealing with a very critical time. I cannot provide the solid figures right now, but on a whole, the crime situation is under control. But unfortunately, I cannot provide updated breakdowns today, so perhaps I can provide them later. Thank you. Now TV, please.
I want
to follow up on the situation at St. Oak Ling. Some injured people told medical workers that they were beaten up by police officers. Are there relevant measures at the St. Oak Ling facility, such as CCTV, which could capture the situation? There are concerns that, like the incident at North Hospital, the arrested persons might be tortured. So at the St. Oak Ling facilities, would there be certain dark corners in which police officers might have beaten up the protesters or the detainees? You said some people refused to be handcuffed. Did that justify the police officers' decision to break their arms or wrists? So would that be equivalent to justifying the police's action to break their arms or wrists? For details at St. Oak Ling, I would defer to Madam Chick. As for the injuries by arrested persons due to the process of being handcuffed.
In general, in our holding facilities, if there is CCTV, usually the camera will be the passageway. We will not have any CCTV at an interview room, and also the search room we talked about yesterday, and also not in a shower. For St. Oak Ling, it is just for temporary holding. So inside St. Oak Ling, we do not have CCTV covering these areas. All our interview rooms in our holding facilities do not have CCTV, and the same applies to St. Oak Ling. As regards arrest, I'd like to take this opportunity to explain. Under the police force ordinance, we exercise our power to arrest persons. In the process, we have to control and subdue the person in question. So we have to ensure the safety of the person to be arrested and our own officers, and handcuffs only be used for security reasons. Indeed, if the arrested person resists, we can use suitable force to control and subdue him until we can have him handcuffed. We have no intention to cause any injury to anyone, including the arrested person and our colleagues. weeks. So long as the person can be handcuffed, no force is needed. In our ordinary police work, whether it be arrest of thugs or in case of fights, after the persons concerned have been handcuffed, then they can be sent to the police car and taken away. Unfortunately, as we can see recently, people are putting up stronger resistance. So the stronger you resist, the more force we need in order to handcuff you. And if the person is willing to be handcuffed, we don't have to use force at all. Let me supplement. As for medical treatment for arrested persons in Sun Nok Ling, for your information, there were 53 persons arrested and sent to Sun Nok Ling, and 30 persons were sent to seek medical treatment. As Madam Chick said, when a person is sent to a holding center, the duty officer will see whether there are observable wounds or injuries and whether the persons concerned asked to see a doctor, checking our records. When these arrested persons were sent in front of duty officer, 10 of them made such a request, or some of them were sent to the hospital because of the observation by the duty officer. So 10 were sent to the hospital. Of course, they couldn't be sent at the same time, so we did some triaging, and the more serious cases were sent to the hospital first, and the not so serious one later. And after a while, for different reasons, some arrested persons claimed to have headache or stomachache and asked to see a doctor. Bone fractures. A few arrested persons had bone fractures. As soon as they were put in front of the duty officer, there was not a case of a person with a hand dangling. So, according to records of the duty officer, people with bone fractures did not display very obvious signs of fracture. However, the duty officer noted different injuries, or either at the request of the APs, they were sent to the hospital as soon as possible. There was a question I could not answer from NCNA. We had 25,295 cases of crime in the first half of this year, down 1,255 cases of 4.7%. And that is the lowest since we had started to collect half-year statistics in 1977. RTHK.
First question regarding the City University student reporter. Can you just tell us, was he wearing a press vest at the scene? And why do you say he wasn't there as a reporter? Can you tell us, like, what was he doing? What differentiates him from what other reporters who were actually at the scene during reporting? Second topic regarding the injured protesters who came from Sun Nok Ling. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but this photo is now circulating on social media regarding the protesters' injury and the broken bones. And if you guys can debunk them, that would be really great. But I mean, if the injury is caused because he was fighting against the arrest, is his refusal to be handcuffed like really warrant such use of extreme force that all his bones are practically broken? And if his injury doesn't come from like during the arrest, would the force actually consider doing an investigation surrounding the situation at Sun Nok Ling? Because there are so many allegations surrounding that facility. I think the public would also want to know the truth surrounding that. Third question, since you folks have repeated again and again that officers calling normal people, protesters, journalists, everybody as cockroaches is inappropriate, with the top brass actually condemn or punish officers who was using that kind of rhetoric towards passers-by? And did the force actually issued internal guidelines surrounding the use of that language, and are you guys just tolerating and letting that be? Those are my 3 questions.
Okay, pass the floor to Mr. Lee for the first question, and the 2 other questions to Mr. Kwong.
The guys, the person you mentioned is is arrested by us yesterday. Is a result of the evidence gatherings inside the logicals. And I cannot disclose the very details about the case because it's unfair to the guys on the subsequent prosecutions. But I have to say that by the charge, by the reason for arrest these gentlemen, that the first is entering and remaining in the chambers of the logicals. That's a part. Another very important is the criminal damage. The criminal damage means that he entered inside, just not only enter and remain inside, he did something. He did something. From the all the video or all the CCTV, the things appear in the public channels, you can see that what is criminal damage done inside the logicals. I don't refer to these guys, but you see that some of them is doing some damages, some vandalism, and some other things. If it is a case, do by amends, do by the persons, we will charge or prosecute this case with the criminal damage.
Was he wearing a press vest?
Sorry?
Was he wearing a press vest?
It's not important,
We want to know if he's there as a reporter.
It's a part of our evidence. Sorry about that, I cannot disclose. But to be very honest, it's irrelevant to the charge against him. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to answer the rest of the question raised by the reporter. Concerning the broken arm, I would be also very interested to know the source of this, and because this information relate to the injured person's personal data privacy, and if this injured person would like to pursue any of his grievances about the process of himself being arrested, please step forward and lodge a complaint or lodge a report, and we'll follow it up. And I understand that you are also interested to know the use of force during handcuffing in the arrest. Actually, through our own observations, the violence used by the rioters of the protester kept escalating. And during the arrest, our officer found it difficult to restrain or to control the arrested person if he or she put up serious resistance. And according to our practice, the handcuffing is made in order to ensure the security and the safety of the arrested person and also the safety of our officers. And as I could see from some of the live news report, that when we try to control an arrested person, they will usually put up great resistance, and when we are trying to handcuff him or her, they will try their best, or no, I shouldn't say this. Some of them will try to put up resistance, not to cooperating with the handcuffing, and so our officer has to use reasonable force to control him and handcuff him. And for the last question, regarding the inappropriate remark to the protester or to the reporters or to the member of the public, and actually I've already repeated many times here, and I'm not going to repeat that. But if any of the member of the public found it, maybe he feel unhappy about that inappropriate remark, please step forward and lodge a complaint, and we'll look into that. Thanks.
My question is the top brass going to condemn more police officers involved, and are there any internal guidelines issues surrounding the use of such language? That's my question.
Actually, I've repeated here for quite a number of times that the management also thinks that this kind of remark are inappropriate, and so.
Are there any guidelines issues?
Concerning guideline, actually, we have different procedures and guideline, and of course, in our values, we clearly state that we have to treat others with respect, and but I'm sorry that we may not have procedures or guidelines in such a great detail that what sort of language we should use or what sort of remark are considered inappropriate. Thanks.
Hello,
I want to follow up on a few points. As for the vandalism of the national emblem at the China Liaison Office on the 28th of July and the multiple vandalisms of national flags, what is the situation with arrests and charges? And last Sunday, some rioters torn down some smart lamp posts. Why did the police act so late and some LegCo members suspected that in Chunwan, some police officers pretended to be protesters in attacking police vehicles. So are you going to respond to such queries? For the first question and the first part of the third question, I would defer to Mr. Lee, and for the second question, Mr. Kong. As to whether shots were fired, I would address that at the end. As for the alleged vandalism of the national flags, and 4 males and 1 female were arrested so far. They were aged between 20 to 23, and they are on bail. As for the vandalism of the national emblem outside the China Liaison Office, 1 male was arrested and he is also on bail. Can you repeat the other question or the third question? Some people said the police officers passed themselves as protesters. So was it true? Can you address such criticisms? First of all, I am not aware of such reports. All I can say is that the people who attacked the police vehicles were not police officers, they were rioters. I want to clarify one point. In the past, some of our officers passed up as other individuals in our arrest operations, but I can clarify that the attacks that day were not conducted by our officers. The police has been deploying different methods in dealing with serious issues, including serious crimes and violence. In conducting these operations, our principle is that we would not provoke or conduct any acts that would lead to anyone else breaching the law. In the past weekend, smart lamp posts were being damaged. Some smart lamp posts were damaged or even torn down. They were obviously unlawful. Such malicious acts would face consequences. Vandalism is vandalism. We would not put any spin on that, and arrests would be made At the time and site, there were no police officers. I watched some live news footage at that time. I think the number of protesters was in the hundreds or even up to 1,000. If we were to arrest the dozens of people who took part in the vandalism, would that stir up the emotions of other protesters present? We didn't want any confrontation because there would be it would lead to unnecessary injuries. But we would state clearly that we would not tolerate any illegal acts. They would be investigated and followed up upon, and we would arrest those who breach the law. As to whether the police officer in question had to fire his gun, I think we have explained that previously. We were dealing with a case of criminal damage. Police vehicles were attacked, and some officers an officer suffered a serious back injury from a sharpened metal pole. There were a lot of violent assailants using metal poles to attack our officers, so our officers felt that they were under threat, and 6 officers drew their guns. One officer felt that the lives of the officers were under threat, and he fired a shot skywards. So we deemed this an appropriate use of force at that time. So it was a restrained decision, and the decision was warranted and necessary. Last 2 questions, please. Cable TV. Since June, some protesters had their personal identification marked down by the police. How would the information be handled? Would the information be passed on to other agencies, including international agencies, or be uploaded to online platforms? I'd like to ask about the Sanok holding center as well. You said there are no CCTVs in detention facilities or detention cells. How can you be so sure that no female protesters were subject to sexual assault by police officers and no excessive force was used against the protesters by the officers? Are you only relying on the logbook? Will more protesters be taken to detention facilities such as Sanok Ling? As of now, have you received any complaints by arrested protesters that they were beaten up by officers in detention facilities? I would invite Mr. Lee to talk about the handling of data, and Madam Chick can talk about the CCTVs in Sanok Ling before I wrap up. In past operations, some suspects were intercepted by police officers and interrogated, and their personal data were taken down. Most of them were suspected to have participated in unlawful assembly, so the first thing we would do is to verify whether they committed any earlier offenses. If the answer is yes, we would follow up. If the answer is no, based on normal interception procedures, we would handle their data accordingly. Thank you.
We'll record it in our own police records. Let me supplement here. In dealing with personal data, we will comply with the requirements under Cap 486 Personal Data Privacy Ordinance. We have to strictly adhere to the requirements of the ordinance. For instance, personal data collected by the force cannot be submitted or passed on to another person unless some parties detainees can seek exemption under the ordinance. For sure, we will not pass on such data to non-local law enforcement agencies. We will have to strictly adhere to the legal requirements. Well, this is a bit difficult. Under CAP 486 Personal Data Privacy Ordinance, Section 58, all the exemptions are there. For instance, a common exemption used by the police is when we investigate crime, we will have to seek that exemption. And so we can request for record from other organizations, but I really cannot remember them by heart now. Whether a request would be acceded to, we have to follow the provisions in the ordinance. That is, the person concerned has to be liable, and I can only accede to the request according to the requirements under the law. For instance, if a person is involved in a crime, he may want to seek damages by civil claim, and under provisions in the ordinance, he will have to use such data for a civil claim. And on the basis of that ordinance, we'll have to accede to his request. But if the case doesn't qualify for the exemption under the ordinance, the request will not be submitted to, acceded to. Well, this is very detailed. If you're really interested, you have to put in a written request. Otherwise, I will have to remember a whole lot of things before meeting with you every afternoon. Whether we have CCTV in our detention facilities, let me reiterate once again that our CCTV is for security purpose. We will have CCTV viewing the entrance and exit of our detention facilities, so that we have a record of people who have gained access to our facilities. And for interviewing rooms, whether we are talking about snorkeling or other detention facilities, they have not installed any CCTV. In 3 police stations, we have got CCTV installed in an interview room in Chang'an, Mong Kok, and North Point police stations on a trial basis. However, anyone entering the facility will be told that during his detention there will be video recording, and detainees of different sexes will be separated into different corridors, and we have CCTVs at corridors recording such matters. And if there is anything happening in a particular detention cell, then I'm sure it will be heard elsewhere and by people passing by. Any complaints regarding snorkeling? Now, I dare not. I don't know at this moment, but previously we have received 2 complaints, but they were not lodged by arrested persons then. And yesterday there was a figure I'd like to clarify. We mentioned that there were 53 arrested persons. In fact, 39 of them have successfully seen a lawyer. We said it was 36 yesterday. In fact, 36 were those who attended a cautioned interview in the presence of a lawyer. So 39 has seen a lawyer, and 36 of them gave cautioned statement in the presence of a lawyer. 9 met their lawyers more than once under our arrangement. 3 groups of lawyers went to the scene, and 2 groups were arranged to go in to interview the arrested persons. These are three groups of lawyers represented a large number of arrested persons with overlapping representation as well. So when we received requests from these lawyers, we spent some time to verify who was the lawyer and arrested person wanted to see it. That took time. And after we have arranged for all three groups to go into the center, one group had already left, and perhaps that's the reason for the accusation. 39 APs met their lawyers, 36 of which gave caution statement in the presence of a lawyer. And we see no reason why the remaining ones were not allowed to do so deliberately by us. Speaker is off mic. Would you consider not sending arrested persons to Sun Oakland anymore? There are accusations that such things had happened in Sun Oakland, but they have yet to be confirmed. And as said by Madam Chick, Sun Oakland is a holding facility that complies with our standards. So we have no intention not to use a detention center, a holding center, which fits our requirements. One was not sent to Sun Oakland. Yes, we totally arrested 54 APs, but one was sent to the hospital directly. So 53 appeared in front of the duty officer. One last, Ming Pao. Last reporter from Ming Pao. How many interview rooms are there in Sun Oakland? There are accusations that there is only one. And you talked about protesters taking justice to their own hands extensively. However, on the 5th of August, there were black-clad people attacked by people not wearing black. So have you considered, or have you investigated whether the attackers, the assailants were Hong Kong people or not? Yesterday it was said that for people arrested, and if they are minors, they could be accompanied by an adult. I'd like to know whether an arrested person who is a minor can be accompanied by an adult at once, because there are claims that social workers wanted to accompany minors but were rejected. What was the first question involving Sun Oakland, please? The number of interview rooms. As far as I understand, you talked about complaints against Sun Oakland. What were the nature? According to my understanding, there should be more than one interview room there. And then two groups of lawyers went in. At first, they met APs one by one. However, because they represented a large number of APs who were waiting. At the request of these lawyers and with the consent of APs, some of the interviews were done in groups. That was an agreed arrangement. As for an actual number of interview rooms, I will provide the information later. I don't want to get it wrong. And regarding the incident on the 5th of August, and also whether minors could be accompanied by adults. Mr. Lee, regarding the case in Tsuen Wan, it's being handled by the crime wing unit or crime squad of the area. As far as I understand, no one has come out to make a report. If we do not understand about the details of the attack, it's difficult for us to investigate. So I appeal to the media, if someone was hurt please contact us so that we can have more information to assist our investigation.
The second question was about those under the age of 16. Yesterday, apparently, a social worker wanted to accompany them. Is this possible? First of all, I clarify that the 3 underage people were not arrested persons. They merely failed to produce their identity card, and as such, they were returned to their family upon verification of their identity, even though they were not arrested. We feel that it's more appropriate for them to contact their parents, because their parents can protect their well-being. Under our procedures or rules, we would first reach out to the parents or guardians, and failing that, we would contact appropriate adults, that is, those aged 18 or above, who care about the well-being of the person involved. And if someone wants to accompany the underage person, the police officers on site would find it very hard to determine whether that person can take care of the well-being of the person involved. So we urge that parents be contacted. This is the end of the press conference.